White nose syndrome is a disease that's caused by a fungus. It's a newly discovered fungus to science, Geomyces destructans. It was discovered when white nose syndrome first was found in the United States in the winter of 2006-2007. The fungus is a common genus that's in caves, but destructans is one that actually grows on the bats. We don't normally see that with fungus, and it grows into their skin and can cause big lesions on the bats and really directly infect them. It also causes them to wake up too often when they're hibernating and burn their fat reserves so that they have trouble making it through the winter. The bats will either die in the cave from the syndrome or fly out onto the landscape trying to find insects in the winter time, which in most places are not readily available, and die on the landscape. And when it comes into a cave, it may take a year or two for it to impact those bat populations, but once it's established in the cave, oftentimes the mortality at a site is over 90%. Georgia DNR is working on surveying our sites in the winter every year. We have several large hibernacula in Georgia that we revisit and count bats and look for signs of the fungus. We're also trying to look for new sites that are important areas where bats hibernate in the winter every year. We're trying to do as much education as possible so that the public is aware of white nose syndrome and what's happening to our bats in Georgia, why bats are important, why we should care if they're dying, and also to educate people about decontamination. When we go into caves, we decontaminate all our gear after we visit a cave. Everything we take into a cave is clean, and we make sure that everyone else who's visiting caves knows that. We know there are still some people that haven't heard of white nose syndrome, but there's been a lot of work to put out press releases and talk to grottos and other cavers so that they understand the importance of decontaminating between sites. And it's not just for white nose syndrome. We know that lots of different species, especially fungus and small animals and microbes, can be moved from site to site. So we want clean caving to be the message, that when we visit sites we should clean our gear for everything. White nose was discovered in Georgia when some National Park Service biologists were completing a survey at sites in Dade County. The sites that were located last year in southern Tennessee were very close to caves in Georgia. We visited those caves last year in Georgia and did not see signs of white nose syndrome, but this year during the survey they saw obvious signs of white nose syndrome, bats with fungus. A bat was collected and taken to the lab at UGA, and it was confirmed that it was in fact Geomyces destructans, and those bats have white nose syndrome. We have 16 species of bats in Georgia. 8 of those species have been affected by white nose syndrome in other parts of their range. We consider most of our bat populations likely to be in some level of decline, whether it's minor or pretty serious. And we're working to set up some long-term monitoring programs using Anabat detectors and other survey methods to see if we can track these populations over time. That will be especially important with the species that may become impacted by white nose syndrome in the future, so we can look at what those declines are. So we're counting those bats every year in the caves, and hopefully over time we'll be able to tell if white nose syndrome will cause declines in those species or not. All of our species of bats in Georgia eat exclusively insects, so that's what most people get excited about with bats. They eat insects that we don't like. They also eat insects that are crop pests and can cause major problems economically. And we also want to be concerned about bats across the world. Bats serve as pollinators in many other places in the world. In Georgia, bats aren't only eating insects, but they are food sources for other animals. They're also important as part of the cave environment. They input nutrients into the cave, and other species rely on those nutrient inputs. They're an important part of our ecosystem and something that's really critical, and bats are one of those species that when they begin to have problems, we will see other species that will likely have problems as a result. So just like everything else, they're connected. And bats have often been thought of in a negative light, but they provide us a lot of important services, and more people are realizing the importance of bats, and that overall we just need to be concerned about the health of all of our populations in Georgia.